Welcome back to Genuine Dread. Tonight I'm sharing a personal experience from a few years ago. There are no supernatural elements here, no exaggerated monsters in the dark, just the cold, hard reality of working the graveyard shift, and the terrifying moment you realize you aren't alone in a locked building. At the time, I was working for a commercial janitorial service to make ends meet. My main route included a large, modern co-working space in a renovated downtown warehouse. During the day, it was packed with tech startups, freelancers, and expensive coffee machines. But my shift started at midnight. By the time I pulled into the empty parking lot, the building was always a dark, silent shell. My routine was strictly mechanical. I'd punch my code into the keypad at the rear service entrance, disarm the security system, and grab my heavy plastic supply cart from the utility closet. Working alone in a massive, empty office building messes with your senses. Without the background noise of 200 people talking and typing, the building felt completely dead. The only sounds were the heavy, vibrating hum of the rooftop HVAC system kicking on and off, and the squeak of my rubber-soled sneakers on the polished concrete floors. I usually kept one wireless earbud in, listening to a podcast, but I always kept my right ear open. You have to stay aware of your surroundings when you're alone. The job was physically exhausting but simple. I pushed my cart down the endless rows of glass-walled offices, emptying small trash cans into my large heavy-duty garbage bag, wiping down desks with industrial citrus cleaner, and vacuuming the conference rooms. You fall into a mindless rhythm. It was around 1:30 a.m. when that rhythm broke. I was on the east side of the floor, wiping down a set of glass doors. The HVAC unit had just cycled off, so the building was dead quiet. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a spooky, creaking floorboard or a dramatic crash. It was a sharp, heavy, metallic clack. It sounded exactly like the push-bar mechanism of the emergency exit door on the far west side of the building. I stopped wiping the glass. I stood perfectly still, holding my breath, and listened. My heart gave a hard thump, but my brain immediately tried to rationalize it. Was the door just settling? Did the wind catch it? Occasionally, a software developer with a tight deadline would pull an all-nighter. But I had checked the parking lot. My beat-up Honda was the only car out there. I took my earbud out and slipped it into my pocket. I grabbed the wooden handle of my heavy industrial mop. I wasn't trying to be brave. I just needed to know if someone was still working, so I wouldn't accidentally throw away their paperwork or scare them half to death when I turned the vacuum on. I started walking toward the west wing. I stayed out of the main center aisle, navigating through the maze of cubicles using only the faint orange glow of the streetlights bleeding through the tall windows. I walked carefully, placing my feet flat to stop my sneakers from squeaking on the bare concrete. The west wing housed the executive offices and the main employee break room. As I got closer to the break room hallway, my stomach dropped. There was a fresh trail of wet, muddy footprints on the light gray floor. They started near the emergency exit and led straight into the kitchen area. It had been raining heavily since 10 p.m. Someone had just walked in from the back alley. I pressed my back tight against the cold drywall just outside the break room entrance. My hands were gripping the mop handle so hard my knuckles ached. I took a shallow breath and leaned just enough to peek around the corner. The main kitchen lights were off, but the large glass front commercial refrigerator was wide open. The bright white LED light from inside the fridge illuminated the room. Standing in front of it was a man. He was soaked to the bone. He wore a heavy, dark, oversized jacket that dripped rainwater onto the floor. He wasn't a late-night office worker. He was frantically tearing through the bottom shelves, stuffing plastic containers of leftover food into a dirty canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He had a half-eaten sandwich in his mouth, chewing rapidly like he hadn't eaten in days. This wasn't a movie. This was a desperate, unpredictable stranger inside a locked building with me at 2 in the morning. Logic screamed at me to back away quietly. You don't confront an intruder when you are alone, unarmed, and far from the front door. My only goal was to get to a room with a lock and dial 911. I took a slow step backward, but as I shifted my weight, the heel of my wet sneaker caught the edge of a plastic floor mat. It let out a loud, sharp squeak. In the dead silence of the office, it sounded like a gunshot. The man froze. He didn't turn around slowly like a cinematic villain. He flinched violently. A plastic Tupperware container slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor, spilling leftover pasta everywhere. He whipped his head around, staring wildly into the dark hallway where I was standing. His eyes were wide, panicked, and erratic. For a split second, neither of us breathed. Then he took a sudden jerky step toward the hallway. I didn't know if he wanted to attack me, silence me, or just run past me to the exit, and I wasn't going to wait to find out. The adrenaline hit my chest like a physical blow. I dropped the mop and ran. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I sprinted down the main corridor, my boots slamming against the concrete. I didn't look back. I headed straight for the janitor's supply room near the front lobby. It had a heavy steel fire door and an industrial deadbolt. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the lock, but I finally heard the heavy bolt slide into the frame. I backed into the corner of the pitch-black closet, knocking over a box of paper towels. The smell of raw bleach in the tight space was suffocating. I pulled my phone out. My fingers were slick with cold sweat as I dialed 911. The dispatch operator answered. I whispered into the phone, trying to control my ragged breathing. I gave her the address and told her a man had broken into the building, and I was locked in a closet. She told me to stay on the line, stay quiet, and that 2 patrol cars were already en route. For 12 agonizing minutes, I stood in the dark. I strained my ears, waiting to hear the man pounding on the door or trying the handle. But there was nothing, just the silence of the building and the sound of my own heart hammering in my throat. Finally, I heard the heavy, distinct sound of police boots walking onto the main floor, followed by the crackle of a police radio. They called out my name. I unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the door open, practically collapsing with relief when I saw the flashlights. They swept the entire building. They checked every cubicle, every restroom, and every supply closet. They found the dropped food in the break room and the muddy footprints. But the man was gone. He had bolted the second I ran. When the officers checked the emergency exit door on the west side, we figured out how he got in. The door used a heavy magnetic security lock. But someone, maybe the intruder earlier in the day, or just a lazy delivery guy, had wedged a small folded piece of cardboard into the door frame, right over the magnetic strike plate. When the door swung shut, it looked completely sealed, but the magnet couldn't physically connect. The building had been wide open the entire night. The police took my statement, but without security cameras pointing at that specific back alley, they had no way to track him down. I called my boss the next morning and quit that location. It's a terrifying realization that the thick walls and security systems we trust are only as strong as a tiny piece of trash blocking a magnet. I still do commercial cleaning, but I never work alone anymore. Whenever I enter a quiet room, I check the physical locks myself, because out here in the real world, the scariest things in the dark aren't ghosts. They are desperate people who find a way to slip through the cracks. There is a specific kind of vulnerability that only exists in the dead of winter. When a massive lake-effect blizzard hits the American Midwest, the heavy snowfall acts like a giant soundproofing blanket over the world. The roads disappear under 2 feet of snow. The plows stop running. You are completely cut off. In those moments, you lock your doors, listen to the furnace kick on, and trust that the extreme, bitter cold is enough to keep the outside world at bay. But human predators adapt. They know that a solid oak door and a reinforced deadbolt are physical barriers they cannot easily break without waking up the entire neighborhood. So they don't use brute force right away. They use psychology. They weaponize your own empathy against you. The events of this night took place in a quiet, middle-class suburb, in a single-story house positioned at the very end of an isolated cul-de-sac. It was past 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. The homeowner was sitting alone in his living room, wrapped in a blanket, watching the local news track the storm. The only light in the house came from the television screen. Then the heavy silence was broken. It was a sharp, frantic knocking at the front door. Nobody visits at 11 at night during a whiteout blizzard. The homeowner set his phone down. He didn't turn on any interior lights. He walked quietly across the hardwood floor of the entryway, keeping his footsteps light, and pressed his eye against the cold brass of the peephole. Standing under the harsh yellow glare of the porch light was a young woman. She looked to be in her early 20s. She was hugging her arms tightly across her chest, shivering violently, snow clinging to her hair. He kept the heavy deadbolt engaged but unlocked the security chain. He opened the door just a fraction of an inch, keeping his heavy winter boot firmly pressed against the base of the door so it couldn't be forced open. The freezing wind immediately whipped into the warm entryway. "Can I help you?" he asked, keeping his voice firm but cautious. The woman looked at him with wide, panicked eyes. She spoke rapidly, her teeth chattering. She claimed her boyfriend had gotten drunk, started a violent argument, and kicked her out of his truck at the end of the street. She said he drove off with her purse and her coat, leaving her stranded in the freezing snow. She begged him to let her step inside, just into the hallway, so she could warm up and use his phone to call her sister. It is a terrifying psychological position to be in. Every human instinct tells you to help a freezing person, but the logic center of his brain started flashing warning signs. He noticed small, unsettling inconsistencies. Her makeup wasn't smeared from crying, and while she was acting cold, her lips weren't blue. She didn't have that deep, bone-rattling shudder of someone who had actually been walking in single-digit temperatures for blocks. "I am incredibly sorry, but I cannot let a stranger into my house this late," he said through the narrow crack. "But my phone is right here in my hand. Tell me your sister's number, and I will call her for you. Or I can dial 911 right now and have a patrol car come pick you up so you're safe." The reaction was instantaneous. The moment he mentioned the police, the woman's entire demeanor shifted. The panic in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, flat annoyance. She didn't argue. She didn't beg for her life anymore. She simply turned her back, walked down the porch steps, and disappeared into the heavy, swirling snow. He quickly shut the door, locked the deadbolt, and slid the heavy metal chain back into place. His heart was pounding. He stood in the dark for another 10 minutes, watching through the peephole. But she was entirely gone. He convinced himself he had just been overly paranoid, but a deep uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. 45 minutes passed. The storm outside only seemed to get worse. Then the knocking returned. This time it wasn't frantic. It was a weak, hesitant tapping on the wood. The homeowner's blood ran cold. He moved much faster this time, quietly making his way back to the front door, pressing his eye to the peephole once again. What he saw made his chest tighten with overwhelming guilt. Standing on his porch was a young boy. He looked no older than 12 or 13. He was wearing a thin gray hooded sweatshirt, no winter coat, no gloves, no hat. He was looking down at his worn-out sneakers, visibly shaking in the freezing wind. This is the ultimate emotional trigger. A grown woman is one thing, but a freezing child bypasses all logic. Every protective instinct screamed at him to throw the door open and pull the kid inside to the warmth of the heater. He unlocked the chain and opened the door an inch again. "Hey," he said softly, feeling a knot in his throat. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The boy looked up. His face was pale. "Please," his voice trembled. "I'm so cold. My mom's car slid into a ditch. She told me to wait while she went to get help, but she hasn't come back. Please, can I just step inside? I can't feel my hands." The homeowner's hand actually reached for the deadbolt. He was 1 second away from unlocking it. But as he looked down at the boy, his brain processed a terrifying physical detail. It was a whiteout blizzard. The wind was blowing sideways, yet the boy's gray sweatshirt was relatively dry. There was barely any snow accumulating on his shoulders or his hair. If he had been wandering the neighborhood looking for his mother, he should have been completely covered in white powder. Furthermore, the motion sensor floodlight over the driveway hadn't triggered. The boy hadn't walked up the driveway or the main path. He had to have been waiting close by, huddled against the side of the house under the roof overhang, completely out of the wind. He was a decoy. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The boy wasn't even looking at him anymore. The child's eyes were darting nervously past the crack in the door, staring fixedly at the dark, blind corner of the front porch, an area the peephole couldn't see. "Stay right there. I am dialing the police," the homeowner said. His voice was no longer soft. It was loud, authoritative, and projecting right through the opening. The boy didn't cry. He didn't ask for his mother. He instantly stepped backward, his face going completely blank. Before the door could even begin to close, 3 massive dark figures lunged out from the blind spot of the porch. They hit the solid wood door with the combined force of a speeding vehicle. The impact was deafening. The door frame violently shuddered, and the heavy brass chain pulled taut, snapping with a sharp, sickening metallic crack. The door violently swung inward, stopping only because the homeowner had braced his entire body weight against it. He screamed at the top of his lungs, his boots slipping on the hardwood floor as he desperately fought to push the door back into the frame. The men on the other side were completely silent. They weren't yelling. They were just shoving, driving their heavy shoulders into the wood, trying to wedge a crowbar into the small opening. With his shoulder pinned agonizingly against the door, he managed to hit the emergency dial on his phone. The dispatcher answered immediately. He screamed into the speakerphone that multiple men were breaking into his house. The exact moment the loud, static-filled voice of the 911 operator echoed from the phone, the crushing pressure against the door suddenly vanished. He heard heavy boots scrambling across the wooden porch, the quick crunch of snow, and then the roar of a heavy engine speeding away down the street. When the police finally arrived, the tracks in the fresh snow told the entire chilling story. The woman, the young boy, and the 3 large men had all parked a block away. The men had been hiding flat against the brick wall of the house, in the dead angle of the porch, the entire time. They were waiting for him to open the door just wide enough to let the freezing child inside. It is a sobering reality check. Evil does not always present itself as a monster lurking in the shadows. Sometimes, the most dangerous threats look exactly like the vulnerable people we are wired to help. Trust your logic, look for the physical inconsistencies, and never let your empathy override your survival instincts. We hand over the keys to our homes more easily today than at any other point in history. We leave lockboxes on our porches for delivery drivers. We give passcodes to house cleaners, and we hire strangers from apps to walk our dogs. We rely on background checks and 5-star digital ratings to give us an illusion of safety. But sometimes, the most unsettling violations of our privacy happen right in the middle of the afternoon, in broad daylight. This event happened to a woman living in a townhouse in the suburbs of Seattle. She worked in corporate finance, which meant she was usually at the office from 8 in the morning until at least 6 in the evening. Because of her long hours, she used a highly popular pet-sitting app to hire someone to come to her house every day at noon to walk and feed her golden retriever, Max. Usually she had a regular dog walker, a college student she trusted completely. But on this specific Wednesday, her regular walker called in sick. Needing a last-minute replacement, she opened the app and booked a guy named David. His profile looked perfectly normal. He had dozens of positive reviews and a friendly photo. She messaged him the instructions. The spare key is under the fake rock by the back patio. Walk Max, feed him, and when you are done, please lock the deadbolt and put the key back under the rock. Around 2 p.m. that afternoon, she started feeling incredibly nauseous at work. It was a severe migraine coming on. Her boss told her to just go home and rest. She didn't bother checking her phone or updating the dog walking app. She just got in her car and drove home. She pulled into her driveway at 2:45 p.m. The suburban street was quiet, bathed in bright afternoon sunlight. Everything looked completely normal. She walked up to her front door, pulled her keys out of her purse, and slid her main key into the heavy brass deadbolt. She turned it, feeling the solid mechanical thud of the lock disengaging. She pushed the door open, stepped inside, and kicked off her shoes. Normally, Max would be waiting right at the door, wagging his tail. But the house was quiet. "Max," she called out, rubbing her temples to ease the migraine. She heard a soft whining coming from the living room. She walked around the corner and saw Max sitting perfectly still on his dog bed. He wasn't acting terrified or aggressive, but he looked deeply confused and subdued, keeping his head low. She assumed David, the new walker, had simply come and gone, and maybe Max just didn't vibe with the new guy. She walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water to take her migraine medication. As she stood at the kitchen island, her eyes fell on the countertop. Sitting right there next to the fruit bowl was her spare house key, the one she kept hidden under the fake rock, the one David was supposed to use. She stared at the metal key, and her brain slowly started to process a terrifying logistical puzzle. Her front door featured a single-cylinder deadbolt. It did not lock automatically when the door closed. To lock it from the outside, you absolutely had to insert a physical key and turn it. If David had finished his job and accidentally left the spare key on the kitchen counter, he would have had no way to lock the door behind him when he left. The front door should have been unlocked when she arrived, but it wasn't. She explicitly remembered inserting her own key into the lock and turning it just 2 minutes ago. There was only one physical explanation. Someone had locked the deadbolt from the inside by turning the thumb latch, and since the spare key was sitting right in front of her, it meant David never left. He had locked the door to ensure no one would walk in on him. He was still inside the house. A cold wave of adrenaline completely washed away her migraine. The silence of the townhouse suddenly felt heavy and suffocating. She didn't scream. She didn't call out his name. In the movies, the main character grabs a kitchen knife and slowly creeps upstairs to investigate. In real life, self-preservation takes over. She heard the very faint, unmistakable sound of a floorboard creaking on the second floor, coming from the direction of her master bedroom. She didn't hesitate. She quietly set her water glass down, grabbed Max by his collar, and walked straight back out the front door. She didn't even stop to put her shoes back on. She walked barefoot to her car, locked the doors, and dialed 911. Because it was the middle of the afternoon, and there was a suspected intruder currently inside a residence. The police arrived within 4 minutes. They went in through the front door she had left open. They didn't find a cinematic serial killer hiding in the shadows with a weapon. What they found was a much more common and deeply disturbing reality. They found David sitting comfortably at her desk in her home office upstairs. He had her personal laptop booted up. Her filing cabinet was wide open. Spread across the desk were her tax returns, her bank statements, and a stack of her personal mail. He was casually taking high-resolution photos of every single document with his phone. When the police questioned him, the truth came out. David wasn't a dog walker. He was a professional identity thief. He specifically used gig economy apps to gain authorized access to people's homes during the day. He knew that most corporate workers wouldn't be home until after 6 p.m. His routine was simple. He would walk the dog to keep up appearances, lock the door from the inside, and then spend hours leisurely digging through the homeowner's personal files, stealing social security numbers, bank details, and personal data, before slipping out unnoticed right before they got home. He thought he had 4 more hours. He never expected her to come home sick. It is a chilling reminder that not all home invasions are violent, and not all threats happen in the dark. Sometimes the predators are the people we willingly invite inside. We trust the digital platforms to vet the strangers entering our homes, but that trust can be easily exploited. Always secure your personal documents. Always double-check your locks. And remember that your home is only as safe as the people you allow to hold the keys.